So we talked a bit about law enforcement, FBI going after you, James, but I'm interested to hear from you, Andy. You're dealing with a different kind of bad guy. You're dealing with extremist organizations that are really angry. You've been exposing a lot of their people and their violent groundwork, we can call it. Not only are you dealing with these people making up lies about you, posting constantly, but physically attacking you and threatening you. So I'm interested in this perspective, your take on journalism. You know, we've heard from James on the institutional powers, but what's happening with groups like Antifa and these other far left extremists targeting you?
What makes them particularly empowered is that the narratives that they are able to spread in the mainstream press haven't really been challenged. You see it every day. So the various riots that happened after Trump were elected were treated as essentially peaceful protests of people reacting in anger against his election win, rather than as people who were rejecting and using violence to voice their opposition to the electoral process.
You're saying there was an insurrection among the far left in D.C. where they smashed windows and set limousines on fire and were attacking people?
Yeah, so the language really matters, right? Yeah, language really matters. Pay attention to what is described as a peaceful protest, mostly peaceful protest versus insurrection, right? Like it's not, the differences are, that contrast is intentional. And Antifa rely on allies in the press because obviously what they do would be unpalatable for the majority of the public if the public was accurately informed. Those wanton acts of arson, maiming and injuries of other people, killing people, carrying out terrorist attacks, such as attacks on government buildings, government facilities, police stations, trying to derail trains.
They actually did derail a train, didn't they?
Yeah, there were 2 convictions last year in Washington State, and that claim...
Where's I'm sorry, I tried to interrupt, but where is CNN headline breaking, New York Times front page, far left extremists derail train? I mean,
that
that's
didn't
huge,
happen.
right?
They didn't talk about it.
It was an attempted derailing. Derailing, but which, the charges was under the anti-terrorism statutes in the federal law. So there were 2 young women. The claim of responsibility was posted on this far left extremist group site called It's Going Down, which was banned by Facebook, by the way, last year. Still operates openly on Twitter.
A Trump supporter could fart in D.C. and it becomes a headline story. Extremists attempt to derail a train. What were they doing? They were pouring concrete or something like that. I don't want to get into too much detail, but they were trying to sabotage train tracks, which can cause not only excessive, property damage, but could kill people. That's the craziest thing about it. That is an attempt to kill, and the amount of damage from derailing these trains, as much as many people on the left don't like to get into the economics of it, it could cause people great suffering in terms of not being able to eat. There are poor people who rely on food coming in and resources from local governments to help them. This level of disruption could have literally killed people directly involved in the train and then have massive repercussions for the poor and the suffering in these cities. No news coverage. Where is it? Where's the big story? Where's the national conversation? Where's CNN to go out and be like, this is insane? These conversations, it doesn't happen.
Yeah, well, the point you're making is sometimes by not reporting, you are reinforcing a particular narrative, and that's what happens. And there are so few people who are focused on the Antifa beat that it makes the few of us who do it really subjected to actual violence, continued threats of violence, and threats of violence against our family. And if you happen to live in a city like I lived in Portland, Oregon, where, in my view, the rule of law is compromised, the police departments don't have the resources to respond, and the local government is so corrupt that they express support for these extremists, then you have essentially a sort of a approval from state actors.
Why do you think that other outlets and other journalists don't want to cover these guys?
Because the few journalists who are from establishment press experience what it's like to be suddenly targeted online.
So you think it's a fear thing?
Yes.
They don't want to do it because they're afraid?
Yeah, it's also an ideological thing, I think. For lack of a better word, communism. Mm-hmm. Communists don't want to breach discipline. For to do so would be an act of blasphemy. Like when Jake Tapper takes his tweet down. Why does he do that?
That's crazy.
That is crazy.
Why does he do that?
Where's the principle? I tweet stupid things all the time and get mocked for. I just leave them up. I don't care.
Right.
Like I'll delete something if I tweet it right away and there's a typo or like a word it's not phrased properly. But I get people being like, "Oh, your tweet's so dumb." I'm like, "I don't know, whatever. I said it." You know. What I mean?
They have. This is the challenge of our brave new world, that they will inflict almost any type of injustice for their cause. It defies reason. It defies logic. They'll and I have respect. I mean this in kind of a dark way. I have so much respect for them. I see it. The Christian. I just get interviewed as a Christian magazine earlier today, and they wanted advice. I'm like, grow a pair of balls. You guys love going to church, but beyond praying, what the hell are you doing? The communists have faith, and it's a faith that they live or die by. They're willing to give up their lives for their cause.
I mean, are they really? Who?
I mean, they're willing to burn down buildings.
They're willing to burn down buildings, but they're not willing to give up their lives.
Some of them may.
No, we've seen some of them giving up their lives. Maybe
they're willing to be incarcerated. I mean, history.
Yeah, but I mean, but if we,
is replete with examples.
I'm talking about recently. So I mean, if we look at, for example, protests at the Capitol, for example, I was talking to an attorney, Marina Madven, who represents. You guys probably know who she is. Represents some January 6th protesters or rioters, whatever you want to say, and there's this rabbi who she's representing who is being charged with parading, and it's a misdemeanor. And her argument, they're trying to sentence him to all this long prison term, well, longer than necessary, like some days prison term. And her argument is that people who were arrested for protesting in the Capitol against Brett Kavanaugh got a $50 fine.
Yeah.
So why is this rabbi getting excessive sentence and excessive fine when he was in there for less time, for like 5 minutes and left?
Because it's a cult.
It's obvious that the machine is slanted in one direction.
Right.
We've all said it in a variety of ways. The institutions are protecting one side and demonizing the other.
Right. But in terms of what James was saying, that protester who got charged with $50, she knows she's not going to have to give up her life.
That's not the
she
case.
knows she's only going to have to give up $50.
The leftists know that they have legal resources behind them. The right doesn't have that.
Right.
They have the National Lawyers Guild behind them.
So they don't have to give up
trainings. That's not true. They're given trainings on what to do. They're willing to do this. They're willing to sacrifice each other. They're willing to a certain degree to sacrifice themselves. Now, many of them may not think they're going to lose their lives completely, but they enter these positions. I've been to these meetings. Luke and I were at a big meeting in France, and they say to everyone outright, you could end up in prison for the rest of your lives and charged with terrorism. And they say, okay. So when I see a dude working at Taco Bell, and he's got a Black Lives Matter mask, and his manager says, take the mask off because the Black Lives Matter thing, get a new one or you're fired. And he says, then fire me. The far left screams. They make demands, and Taco Bell backs down and says, we're sorry. The right does nothing. They do nothing.
It's the revolutionary heart of communism, I think. It's the power to act upon their convictions. And I think history is replete with accounts of this. Whittaker Chambers wrote about it. Douglas Hyde wrote about it. He converted from communism to Catholicism. There's a lot of examples of people. It's at the heart of their, for lack of a better word, religion. And I think they're willing to act upon their ideals. And from my perspective, I think we can learn from their faith to act. Not break the law, but not worry about being shamed. In some regards, the modern day equivalent of giving up your livelihood. You're giving up your livelihood.
Yeah,
and your reputation.
Yeah.
And your accounts. They don't care.
We had Darren Beatty.
For speaking out.
We had Darren Beatty on the show.
They're not afraid. They're not afraid.
Darren Beatty said he thinks that the right, and I'm paraphrasing, but I think the general idea was the right is actually more prone to cancel culture than the left because the right has more people scared of the mainstream opinion against them. So they're willing to tell people who are either to the right of center or, who are more conservative, traditional conservative, they're not going to defend them. And you see this in Congress even. Marjorie Taylor Greene gets condemned and booted off her committee assignments because the Republican Party panics. Meanwhile, Ilhan Omar can say whatever she wants.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah, and then Donald Trump just wants to be liked by the New York Times.
Yeah,
He wants to be liked by the corporate institutions, and that kind of train of thinking, it's not going to achieve anything.
There are Republicans who care more about the opinion of the New York Times than the opinion of their own constituents.
That is exactly the point. And until they stop caring, they can't be effective. And it comes down to the faith. I've been saying this for years, and I don't know how else to say it. It sounds like a cliche, but the moment the Republican Party stops being you give them that power. We give them that power. That's not a power they have. It's only a power if you give it to them. And the moment you stop caring and you stop giving them, then you're free to actually do. But they won't, because a lot of the people in the Republican Party aren't there for the right reasons.
You want to know why they don't like you, James? Because you changed the news cycle. How is the news cycle set? The New York Times, CNN, these big companies decide there's a big story, and then people in politics try and jump on it to address the issue. And I wonder that sometimes. I'm like, how is it that the New York Times just decides to run a headline story, and all of a sudden that's what we're talking about? But something interesting happens with Veritas. You report a story and it trends number one on Twitter. All of a sudden, they're forced to address it, and they don't like doing that.
I want to get even deeper on you. This is a Daily Beast headline by Lloyd Grove, and they tried to do this shame crap with me. They tried to get me to, I'm so sorry, I apologize, I shouldn't have done. And the headline reads, "It's impossible to shame James O'Keefe."
That's a badge of honor right there.
Do you understand? We should frame this and put it in our bathroom at headquarters. Do you understand now how the game is played? The whole point is to shame you.
When they couldn't,
that's their modus operandi.
And here's what's scary: when they couldn't shame you, the FBI shows up. When they couldn't shame Andy, they found him in the street and they beat him up.
Well, they're running out of arrows, aren't they? Because how do you exceed? Do you know how aggressive it is for the FBI to execute a search warrant against an American journalist?
They're scared.
The Attorney General of the United States expressly forbids it in a memo by Merrick Garland in July. You do not execute search warrants against journalists, particularly for this issue. They probably broke the law. And doesn't that show kind of a bit of desperation?
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder if there's something else we don't know yet. The FBI maybe got worried that you had a whistleblower with some information, and the only way they could figure out what stories you were working on was to drum up some fake search warrant to get access to your documents.
Well, the problem with that strategy is that most of my employees, I'm the CEO of the company, I do some reporting, but not all. Most of our employees are the ones with sources, and they didn't take their phones.
Well, they don't know what to do. I think they're panicked. They're desperate. We can see it with like you mentioned, Libby, how they're going after these January 6 guys with extreme charges relative to what the left has done. And we had an insurrection in 2017. Luke and I were there on the ground. We saw conspiracy charges against all of these, black-clad individuals who were smashing windows, setting fires, and most of them just got let go.
That's right.
They couldn't hold any charges against them.
Well, and that goes on in so many of these cities that are Democrat run, and they've just taken that strategy and they're using it all over the place. Gascon and the DA in LA does this catch and release thing. That's not working. The new DA in New York has promised to do something very similar. It's going to make the city that is crumbling even worse.
In New York, just really quickly, in New York, there was activists being arrested for eating without a vax pass, eating without permission from the government when a woman was murdered yards away from them.
Yeah.
So the police is prioritizing vaccine domestic passports over literal murders that happened.
Well,
and this is happening under the Eric Adams administration that campaigned to be tough on crime. And this is happening in the city right now. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Well, they also promised to be tough on vaccine mandates, and they've continued that as well.
To the extent where people are literally being thrown in front of trains,
well,
and they're not doing anything because they're arresting people who don't have
permission
from the government to eat at
front
restaurant,
of trains
which is crazy.
for some time. That's actually not new in the city, although it is horrifying and
the
terrifying.
Crime is up.
Crime is up.
Yeah.
No, it's a disaster. It's a disaster for sure.
It's
so interesting. Andy and I were talking about this earlier, that so many of these cities that are Democrat run. What was our conversation? like I'm blanking. But we were talking about that.
By mid-December, there were a dozen cities in America that had surpassed its historical record on homicides and murders, Portland being one of them, and there were 11 others. And this was just mid-December. I'm not sure if there were, by then, the end of 2021, if there were more than that. It's a direct consequence that will be felt for years and years of the political and social changes in our culture after George Floyd died. That was...
Right. And it's like social justice initiatives are not going to make cities safer, it turns out. It's just going to make it worse for the very people that you're claiming to try and protect.
But I wonder if that's, these people aren't trying to protect anybody.
No.
We sit
well,
here,
they're
we
trying
have
to protect
conversations.
themselves and the people who read the New York Times.
I think it's worse
they're
than
trying
that.
to protect criminals.
I think it's worse than that. It's the chaos that destroys the system that allows them to exploit it. They're letting people out of prisons because it creates crime. They're doing these. They're setting forth these policies that are making everyone's lives genuinely worse and more chaotic. Then, as everything gets crazy, they come out and say, "We're the solution. Give us the power." They enact policies that destroy the system and then tell you they're the only solution.
Yes, they do that. And then they enact further policies that continue to destroy things.
Yes, I think they do that is another good way to say it too, because these policies are utter crap.
Yeah.
They don't make sense. They come out, and often by decree.
Yes.
They're pushing these policies.
Well,
that are
and of
destroying
course
everything.
we've had nothing but rule by decree for the past 2 years, right? These executive orders have got to stop. The emergency powers that have been given to governors and mayors have got to end. The people need their representation. In New York City, we're being mandated without representation at this point. It's like some Stamp Act bullshit is what we've got going on.
They're mandating you guys get 3 vaxes now, or is it still 2?
It's still the 2, but
But cases are through the roof anyway.
and there's room on those vax cards for a whole bunch of more crap that they can inject us with.
That's what the conspiracy theorists were saying. Like, why is there 4 empty
Why are there 4? Yes.
lines
What
here?
is
This
this
doesn't make any
about?
sense. And the conspiracy theorists were saying it's not just going to be 2, it's going to be a lot more. And conspiracy
I
theorists
keep
are right.
getting into arguments with people too about whether or not my child should be vaccinated, and I'm like, he's been exposed to COVID 500 million times. He's tested negative 500 million times. He was around me when I got COVID. He was around his dad when his dad got COVID. He keeps being fine. Like, if he's fine, what do we need this for? So many kids are fine. They're requiring 5-year-olds not only be vaccinated but also wear a face mask just to go to like whatever, the Olive Garden in Times Square, which I don't know why anyone wants to go there, but still anywhere to go to the Met.
I have a question. Have any of the politicians or activists who demanded that police be defunded apologize that their project resulted in historical numbers of black and brown people and vulnerable people dying in urban areas?
They just ignore that fact. They ignore it. We saw that video where the 2 Antifa women are vandalizing the property, and 2 young black women say, "Why are you doing this? Get out of here. We don't want this." And like, we're doing it to help you. We're helping you. It's like, no, you're not.
You're destroying our community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll tell you that story from when I was in Ferguson, when the young black man linked arms to defend the liquor store where Michael Brown had bought or had stolen the cigarillos, and they were interviewed by Al Jazeera, and they said, "These people looting and raiding our stores don't live here, man." But you know what we end up seeing? From, I think it was the New Republic, I can't remember which outlet it was, so forgive me if it wasn't, but in defense of looting, that's what they called it. As people who lived in the community were begging for the violence to stop, and outside forces were exploiting it and burning down their buildings, prominent left-wing activist media said it was a good thing. Yeah, they were. It was revolution, and I'm like, the people who live there aren't doing this.
I'm glad you brought that up. NPR did a very glowing interview with the author of that book,
Vicky Osterwell.
Yes, that's correct. And this is why narrative is important, because when the mainstream left essentially puts out this, is platforming people who are arguing in support of violent extremism and criminality, that shifts the whole Overton window. And I think we've seen that very clear. We've seen that slowly in the last 6 years in the opinion sections of the New York Times. I mean, they publish some really awful things, like I'm still disturbed by that one piece of the parent asking if his black child should have white friends.
Right.
Yeah,
That was really upsetting. That was the Charles Blow story, I think, wasn't it?
I don't
Yeah, I
recall.
think it
So that shifts, and we've seen, as all that violence was happening in 2020, where it wasn't just property destruction. We had at least 26 people who died as a result.
and there were peripheral deaths too.
Yeah.
So
Right.
there were some instances where people died indirectly as a result of the riots, like roads being closed, ambulances being blocked, things like that. And then you had the overt murders, people like David Dorn, who were just killed in these riots. Reporting that I will always give a shout out to Michael Tracy, where he actually drove to these small towns that people never heard of.
It was Ikau and Yanka. Sorry.
It was what for what?
That was the
that's
author.
right.
Yeah.
Author of what?
I had it wrong.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Can my children be friends with white people?
Right.
Yeah.
Michael Tracy went. He drove across the country and he went to these very small towns and he saw boarded up windows, spray paint saying "Please don't hurt us," things like that. Spare our store.
I saw it myself. So I was in the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, Chaz, in Seattle. This is where BLM, far left extremists, and Antifa took over 6 blocks of a major American city, created a hard border, and had people with guns guarding these checkpoints. it was allowed to go on 3 weeks. People died there. On the wind, and this was a really heavily densely populated area. The businesses on there had signs that said, Black-owned business, Asian-owned business, person of color-owned business. As sort of these, it seems really kind of like medieval, right? It's like, please don't harm us, because every inch of that entire 6 blocks was vandalized.
I have to wonder, we often talk about civil war or civil unrest or whatever, fun in I guess a funny twist or whatever, or however you want to describe it. When Luke was reading about post-pandemic civil unrest is when we got swatted. So I'm curious, Luke, if we never actually, I don't think got to flesh out what was going on with that. As we're looking at what happened with Chaz and with Minnesota and with all this stuff, I think there's a real possibility that not only were we already likely to see civil unrest because of the pandemic lockdowns, but you add to this the fact that Black Lives Matter rhetoric and rioting over the past few years has never been checked. It has never been held to account. I think that's going to lead to something, substantial.
Especially when you consider the economic factors that are also adding a lot of stress to the entire system, with people finding it harder and harder just to find commonly household used items. The store shelves are also being emptied, not just because of the winter storm, but because of the global supply chain shortages and the problems that have started that we still haven't felt the full effects of. So when you combine all of that and the historical pretext for unrest when it comes to pandemics, this is a recipe for disaster, especially at the state that the United States is in right now, with what people are calling a decline of an empire. There's a lot of things coming together all at once, but it's a storm that's absolutely dangerous to be in.
The BLM riots and the Antifa riots, it wasn't that they were only unchecked. They were encouraged. And those rioters were encouraged to flout COVID restrictions. So I remember in June 2020.
Just a real quick interjection.
Yeah.
Actually, it was one article said that they actually reduced the spread of COVID.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. No joke. They reported that.
Well, Andrew Cuomo said, and Bill de Blasio said, that if contact tracers spoke to people who had been protesting for social justice, they were not to ask them if they had been, not to ask people, have you been doing this, in order to help the contact tracing. But it was in June of 2020 that there was a 10,000 person protest outside of the Brooklyn Museum of Art in Brooklyn. 10,000 people out protesting to end violence against Black trans people. And the mayor said this was more important than COVID restrictions. And it was literally at that moment, like, I was already sort of done with this pandemic in May. I can't, whatever. And then at that moment I was like, and everything you have said and everything you are now going to say is a complete and total fabrication.
Yep.
It's fully a lie. As soon as there's 10,000 people allowed to hang out outside the Brooklyn Museum and protest, supporting Black trans lives, and me and my kid can't go to the movies and we can't go to the Met and we can't do anything, everything you are thoroughly discredited, 100% discredited. The government entirely,
I think,
in New York State and in the city.
I think I remember watching de Blasio on the corporate media. I think it was CNN announcing.
What a shyster.
Yeah, announcing, hey, we're going to restrict this. You can't go to the movies. You can't go to the supermarket. You can't eat at restaurants. You can't do this, and then this. And then he was asked, what about the protest? He was like, oh, they're justified.
That's fine.
How?
And it was probably a bunch of these same stupid doctors and researchers and scientists who wrote the Rogan letter, who penned that letter saying that racial justice protests are a reasonable reason to not adhere to COVID restrictions.
You mean the dentists and nursing students?
Whatever.
Made up the list.
And the cannabis farmer?
Yes, that guy.
I got respect to the guy who's farming cannabis, but I don't think he should be. He's not a doctor.
The non-board certified veterinarians.
Exactly.
These people. Yeah.
Back alley veterinarians.
Right.
I don't like what Joe Rogan's talking about.
The veterinary abortionists.
Oh, no.
Oh, man.
Sorry.
Thanks for checking out this segment from the Timcast IRL podcast. If you want to watch live, you can check out this channel Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Now, don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, and if you want more unfiltered and uncensored content with all of these guests, go to timcast.com and become a member. All of these guests you know and love in exclusive segments on our website where we are unrestricted in what we talk about, so you'll definitely not want to miss it. Thanks for hanging out. We'll see you all next time.